Hello, everybody, and welcome to Law at the Library, a partnership between the Evanston Public Library, the Chicago Public Library, and the Chicago Bar Association. My name is Lorena Neal. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the legal literacy librarian at the Evanston Public Library. We're delighted to have everyone here tonight to discuss entrepreneurship, starting your own business. Our presenter tonight is Matt Formler of Formler and Formler LLP, which is a fun thing to try and say all together at once. I will tell you a little bit about the format for this evening, and then we will get started. I'll introduce our speaker, who will then give the presentation, followed by a question and answer period. If you have any questions for our speaker, you can type them into the Q&A window, which you will find near the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also use the chat feature to ask your questions, and I will be collecting your questions as they come up and give our presenter the opportunity to answer them at the end of the presentation. So feel free to add them whenever you think of them. If you have any technical issues or questions, you can feel free to direct those to me in the chat as well. Our next Law at the Library topic will be a special Know Your Rights presentation on the state of environmental law in our area on April 23rd. I'll link the page with the schedule and registration links for that in the chat. And you can also see videos of previous presentations of Law at the Library on the Evanston Public Library YouTube page. So I will post a link to our Law at the Library YouTube playlist in the chat as well, in case you're interested. We do also have a list of general free and low-cost legal resources on the EPL website, so I will add those links as well. Our speaker tonight is Matthew Formler of Formler and Formler LLP. I get to say it again. Since founding the firm in 2011, Matt has represented a diverse range of clients in both transactional and litigation matters. Matt focuses on assisting clients with startup formation and corporate transactions. He has assisted a number of founders and entrepreneurs in a variety of industries with the foundation and scaling of their businesses. Additionally, Matt has extensive experience in mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, equity transactions, entity formation, commercial real estate, and corporate governance and representation of privately held businesses. Currently, Matt serves on the American Bar Association's Joint Task Force for drafting and maintaining model short-form acquisitions agreements. And for the 7th year in a row, he has been named a leading lawyer in Illinois for closely and privately held business representation, as well as mergers and acquisitions law, a recognition earned by the top 2% of attorneys in Illinois in their areas of practice. Matt received his bachelor's degree in business administration from Illinois Wesleyan University, go Titans, and his Juris Doctor from DePaul University College of Law. Welcome, and over to you, Matt.
Thanks so much. I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully everyone can see the slideshow. So today we're going to talk about starting a business. I'd like to first start with a disclaimer here that I have to put up here. This is not tax or legal advice, and this does not create an attorney-client relationship. So to start, I wanted to focus on a couple assumptions here about the formation of the businesses we will be talking about today. So the first assumption is that these are businesses formed in Illinois and not in another state. The second assumption is that these are for-profit businesses. And the third assumption is that these are operating businesses. These are not simply holding companies or investment companies because they have different objectives. And then lastly, that the business is not a professional entity providing professional services that are regulated by a governing entity or department like the Illinois Department of Professional Responsibility. So the first step in that clients typically ask me in starting a business, they will ask me, what should I do if I want to explore starting a business? And I think there's a few questions that you want to ask yourself and also kind of do some market research in order to determine if it's a good idea, if there's a market for it, how you can separate yourself from competition. So define your why. Figure out why you want to do what you want to do. I think that it not only helps you craft your business concepts and plan, but it also gives you really that affirming background in what you're going to do and why it's important for you to do it. And it makes you kind of articulate it to others in a more authentic and genuine way when you actually know why you want to do it. The second thing is gather information on your customers and clients, because that's how you're going to figure out whether you're providing a service, whether you're selling a good. You kind of need to know about your target market. The third piece is really learning about your competitors. So you want to know what exactly are the competitors in your industry or job market. What are they doing? What are they not doing that maybe you can fill a gap? Are they doing things that you can build upon and do better? Can you offer the same service or goods at a different price point or in a different way that may appeal to customers? These are things that you want to kind of determine in market research before you start. So some initial considerations apart from the market research. What I typically tell clients is if we're looking at the umbrella in three big topics under the umbrella, we're going to look at developing a business plan. And a lot of that comes from the market research that we just talked about. Number two is you want to determine, entity structure and business details, which we will get into shortly. And then you also want to talk about financing the business, another topic that we will dive into very shortly. So to sort of expand on these three key topics, let's talk about developing a business plan first. So what is a business plan? It's the foundation of your business. It's a blueprint. That's what I tell clients. You're really trying to use this blueprint to communicate the business's objectives. And so what should it contain? Here's a list of some things that I typically see in clients' business plans. Executive summary, a description of the services or the products that you're going to offer or sell, a profile of your target, customers and market, other analysis from your market research, advertising strategies or marketing strategies that you intend to start at launch, and lists. This is sort of the foundation of your financials is, a list of assets for the business that you either have or plan to get, liabilities, budgets, timelines, forecasts. So these are all things that will help you figure out now and later different stages of your business from an early concept so that you can be as successful as possible. Now, you'll see throughout this presentation, I'm going to have a number of these big, yellow caution signs. And these are really to highlight, get you to stop and think for a second about something. And here, a practical tip is, this is more on the legal side of things. When you come up with this business plan, you want to be careful about who you share it with, because you don't want some third party to take your business plan that you've shared with them and use it for their own benefit. So typically what I see is clients will ask me to draft a non-disclosure or a confidentiality agreement. And this is a simple agreement that protects the disclosure of information so that they can freely disclose certain information and have recourse. They have a blueprint for if this party takes my information and uses it or misappropriates it, what can I do to stop them and recoup any damages? That's what this document typically contains. And then, people ask me all the time, who would typically see a business plan? So you have lenders, investors, you have suppliers, distributors, potential partners that you might bring into the business you want to share this with, employees, customers or clients, banks. These are all parties that would probably have eyes on your business plan. So I wanted to share a couple resources with you. You don't have to furiously write these links out right now. I can make sure to coordinate and send this PowerPoint presentation out at the end of this so that you can have access to this. But the Small Business Administration and the City of Chicago, they have great resources for developing business plans that you can look at. So now we're getting into more my neck of the woods in terms of the legal structure in setting up a business. Now, people ask me all the time, what is important about setting up a legal entity to operate a business? Well, they offer a number of benefits. They offer a number of, tax treatments. So typically what I say is, depending on your objectives, your goals, this isn't a decision we make in a vacuum. We consult with your accountants, we consult with you and make sure that this is serving your purpose. So typically a business entity will shield you from personal liability, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But really, four main pieces that I typically tell clients that really dictate what type of entity you're going to look at is, number one, different tax treatment. So depending on what type of entity that you're looking at setting up, they are taxed differently at the federal and state level. And so you want to make sure that you're picking a suitable structure for you. They have different management structures. So a corporation and a LLC, a limited liability company, do not have the same management structures. There's different liability protection. And then there's different options in terms of equity, ownership, financing, depending on what type of business entity you have. So we're going to get into this now a little bit more. The two most common, now there's a number of different types of business entities out there, but the two most common that we see are limited liability companies and corporations. Now there's different offshoots of these things, and there are other options, like I said, but for for-profit entities, the majority of my clients are using these business entities to operate their businesses. So we'll talk about a corporation first. I think it's important to note that all of these business entities are creatures of statutes. So what I mean is that there are statutes in Illinois that govern these different types of business entities. So for instance, a corporation is governed by the Illinois Business Corporations Act. So the statute itself has certain things that are permitted. It might prohibit you as a corporation from doing certain things. It's important to consult an attorney who knows about these things so that you can set up properly, because if you have certain goals and objectives and you're choosing the wrong entity, that may be a problem. So a few basic points about corporations. They are owned by one or more shareholders, and typically corporations can have different shares or classes or series of stock. So stock is there's common stock, which is sort of the general ownership of, the founder equity in a corporation. You could have things like preferred stock. You can have restricted stock. These are things that you can work with an attorney to sort of structure for different partners or investors or employees. By default, it's important to note that corporations are taxed on two different levels. So they call this a double taxed entity. And what that means is all the revenue that the corporation earns is taxed at that level. The corporation files its own tax return and pays taxes on that. Then any distributions or dividends that are paid to the owners are taxed again at their own income tax level. That's why we call it a double tax. So there are times where this may not be advantageous to you as an owner because you're paying tax twice, in a sense. So one way to get around this, there's something you may have heard of called an S corporation, a small business corporation. It is not a different type of entity. It's simply a tax designation that you file. When you form a corporation, you can elect to be taxed from the federal, the IRS, as an S corporation. So S corporations bypass the double tax, and they do have certain benefits that a lot of business owners prefer to utilize. So in terms of liability protection, corporations are generally insulated from liability. So if you're a shareholder and you're running a business and the corporation owes money to another party through a loan or a contract and defaults on that, typically, as long as there was no fraud or intentional acts or gross negligence, the corporation's responsible for that debt or that contract amount, not the individual shareholders behind it, unless they personally guaranteed that somehow. So typically I tell clients, you are not, liable for the corporation's debts or liabilities. And that's a real comfort to people, because if the company just doesn't work out, the corporation will have no money to pay these debts off and may have to dissolve, but you personally are shielding your assets, your personal assets, your home, any of your assets, your bank accounts, your investments, anything like that is typically not subject to your corporation's liability. And then the way that corporations are governed, and we call this a C Corp because it's not an S Corp. The C Corps are governed by a board of directors who make day-to-day decisions for the business. And then certain major decisions are typically approved or consented to by shareholders. So if it's just you running the business or just a handful of people, you will serve usually both roles as a board of directors and shareholders. But the bigger you grow, sometimes you bring in folks like investors who may only be a shareholder, not have day-to-day decision making. That's important when you're setting up a corporation, to sort of have that plan in mind so that you can structure that accordingly. So now on the other side, we talk about limited liability companies. Now, LLCs are slightly different than corporations. They're owned by members, not shareholders, but it's very similar in concept. And unlike a board of directors, you typically have a manager or a board of managers. Now, the tax structure of a LLC is typically there's one level of tax, and this is because limited liability companies are essentially a hybrid of partnership tax and law and corporate tax and law. It's kind of both. So they call these pass-through entities, which means all the revenue that the company earns as an LLC is passed through directly to the owners. So instead of the LLC filing a tax return, the LLC is essentially passing that revenue through to the owners, and they all get what's called a K-1 partnership statement on their personal income tax return that shows their portion of profits and losses for the company. That's important because you're bypassing that two-layer system with a corporation. Now, a lot of people get confused about this. Limited liability companies can be taxed like an S Corp. So you can be an underlying limited liability company or a corporation and still be taxed like an S Corp. And that's important because if the tax benefits of an S Corp are appealing, you don't have to be a corporation. And we'll get to why that matters in a second. But one of the important things is that LLCs are much more administratively easy to operate and run as opposed to corporations. Corporations require annual minutes in meetings, and the annual filings that you have to make with the Secretary of State, which we'll talk about in a second, are a little bit more burdensome than a limited liability company. So typically, a lot of clients prefer to set up as an LLC so long as their objectives are met and their goals are achievable through an LLC. So in terms of how do we form an entity in Illinois? Well, what we do is we have to file with the Business Services Division of the Secretary of State of Illinois. And each type of entity has its own division within the Business Services Division. So there's an LLC division, there's a corporations division, there's a not-for-profit division. There's a number of different segments here. And so you want to make sure you're filing in the appropriate division. And then in order to file, you file what's called articles of organization for an LLC or articles of incorporation for corporations. And you have to pay the appropriate filing fee. I've put the link here so that you could sort of see the main division's website. Now, what does the articles of incorporation or organization contain? Really, you're filling out a form where you're giving the legal business name, so whatever name you choose, And we'll get to this tip in a second about the availability of names. You always want to kind of make sure the name is available before you just use it. You have to give the principal place of business where you're operating from. And even if it's from your own home and you don't have like office space or manufacturing space or retail space, you still need to give a principal address and the registered agent in office. Every entity in the state has to have a registered agent. It has to have a registered office. It can be anybody in the state over the age of 18. It can be you. It can be your attorney, your accountant. And really, the purpose of the registered agent is that they accept service on your company's behalf. And they also receive your annual report, which needs to be filed annually. The purpose statement is typically there's a default statement on the form, and the only time you're going to customize that purpose statement is if you have a specific nuanced entity, and usually an attorney can help you with that. In terms of ownership information, you're usually providing names of the managers of an LLC or the directors and officers of a corporation. And corporations, I mentioned before, have a little bit more they have to disclose. And one of those things is they have to provide certain information about the stock that is offered in the corporation. So they typically have to let the Secretary of State know how many shares of stock the company is authorized, which means how many shares has it permitted the company to give out, and then how many it's actually issued to its owners, and what's the amount of paid-in capital. So how much money was injected into the business for that stock. That has to be reported. And anytime you make a change in those numbers, you have to, file an amendment with the Secretary of State, which can kind of be burdensome. And then lastly, whoever's drafting that form and filing it, they have to put their information on the form. That's who the organizer is, or the incorporator. So I mentioned big caution sign. You want to make sure that the name is available with the Secretary of State so that you don't get a rejection when you make the filing. So there's a way where you can actually do a name search. You can type in even on Google, like Illinois business or Illinois Secretary of State business search. It should give you the page where you can actually type in the name you're thinking of. And if that name is being used by some other business owner in Illinois, it should come back as a result in the search. If not, usually it's available, but you want to make sure that you consult with somebody who knows about this stuff, because not only do we think about this from a legal entity name, AKA, is this name available with the Secretary of State, but also we think of it as from the trademark side of things. So we won't really dive into trademarks too much today, but essentially a trademark is something that you can obtain with the state or with the United States Patent and Trademark Office to protect a source of goods and services. And a lot of people will, once they set up their business, they'll file to protect the name or the brand of the business with a federal trademark or a state trademark. You want to make sure that no one else is using the name anywhere, because it can, one of the issues I see all the time, and I try to explain to folks, is you don't want to start your business by having to rebrand right away because someone else is using the exact same name or brand that you're going to use, and they send you some sort of cease and desist letter trying to, prevent you from using the name. And if they have legal standing to do that, you're going to have to rebrand. So it's better to kind of do your due diligence and conduct a search before you start. So what I recommend to clients is go on a search engine, search the name of the business you're thinking of running, see if others are using it anywhere in the country. You can engage a lawyer to help you search on the trademark register. There are companies that can help do that. And it's important because you want to have that clearance so that you can use that brand and you alone. The next step, once you form the business entity, we talk about tax registration. So with the IRS, the federal government, we have to get what's called an EIN number, which is a federal tax ID. And that is used for you to file with the IRS your corporate returns or your LLC returns. It's used by banks, and so I've included the link here. It's a very simple process. Takes about 5 to 10 minutes to get an actual EIN number. You can get it online. You don't have to submit it on paper through the mail. They do allow you to do it this way. Now, one thing I mentioned before, if you are planning to take an S election to become an S corp, there are certain filings you need to file at this, within a limited amount of time. So, for instance, with a new business, if you set it up, in order to timely file an S election, you have to do it within 90 days of filing your entity. So you want to consult with an accountant or tax professional to make sure you file the right forms with the IRS. Some other, and I'll cover the S corp thing one more time, but another thing to think about is from the state side, depending on if you're if you're a seller of goods, a wholesaler, reseller, you may need to get with the Illinois Department of Revenue you may need to make certain filings to get things like a Reg 1 or a certificate, so it allows you to resell goods so that you're not taxed sales tax on certain sales. And you want to work with a tax professional, make sure you get all the right tax filings in every, at both the federal and state level. So to give you, I've mentioned S corps a little bit here, and some people may be thinking like, I still don't understand the concept. So what is an S corp election? So it allows you to avoid the double taxation, and it has certain, benefits. And really what those are is, if you work with a tax professional and you ask them to model out, what would my tax liability be if I were taxed as a LLC, a corporation, or an S corp, they can sort of give you a rundown of the differences. If you made X amount of dollars this year, here's how you would be taxed. You'd be taxed at this percentage of your income. So it might benefit you to be an S corp over a LLC or a C corp. Those are things you want to figure out early on before anything really gets going, so that you can timely make those filings. Now, as I mentioned, you've got the timing, and so it is 2 days and 15 months, I'm sorry, from the beginning of the tax year. So that's one thing. The next is, people ask me all the time, so what's the big deal if I want to be an S corp? Why is that a bad thing? And I say it's not a bad thing, but it is restrictive. So the IRS says if you want to enjoy the tax benefits of being an S corp, you have to comply with the restrictions that we set forth for S corps. And that means you can only have one class of equity. So whether it's an LLC or a corporation, you can only have one class of stock or membership interest. You can't do stock options. You can't do preferred stock or anything other than common stock or common interests. It has restrictions on who can own the equity, and this can be where things get challenging. So you have to be a U.S. citizen or a green card holder in order to be eligible to own S corp equity. And that can be a problem if you want to convey equity to somebody who's here on a green card or doesn't have citizenship yet. And on the other side of things, it has to be an individual or a single member or sole shareholder entity. So it cannot be, if you're like, hey, there's this LLC with 6 people in it and they want to invest in my company. If you're an S corp, they can't, because it's a multi-member entity or a multi-shareholder company. They cannot. They can individually all invest, but that entity itself cannot be an investor, and that turns off certain people. So as I mentioned, I sort of touched on this a minute ago, but one of the big caution things, again, like at the state level, if you are selling goods, you will likely need a certificate because you'll need to report sales tax. If you're reselling goods, you're going to need a certificate of resale. So these are things you want to talk about with your accountant. So something new this year in the presentation, and this is a very hot topic. Some of you may have heard of this, some may have not. A new statute was enacted by US Congress. They have been talking about this since 2018. I have attended law conferences where this was a big ticket. It's called the Corporate Transparency Act, and it is a statute that is designed to prevent money laundering between small businesses in this country. And so some background is September 11th was largely financed by terrorists using domestic shell companies to launder money. And so the government said this can't happen again. We need to know who owns these entities so that this sort of activity stops. So every small business in America that fits certain requirements will have to make a filing with we're calling it FinCEN. It's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They are they're basically a department of the U.S. Department of Treasury. They're a division, and basically, if you are a small business that has less than 5 million in revenue or gross receipts and under 20 employees, you will have to make this filing. And the filing is basically you have to show the government certain information about the owners of the business. So you have to give them any beneficial owner is somebody who owns or controls more than 25% of the business itself. So you have to give your name, address, a copy of either your driver's license or passport, or some similar document. And there are heavy fines and potential jail time for failure to comply and also refusal to comply. So anybody that is concerned, I have told them I wouldn't want to test the government in this sense. And so basically any existing business entity before this year, before January 1st, 2024, that was existing has a full calendar year. So they have until this December 31st to make their filing with FinCEN. Any new entities that are created this year have 90 days from the date they file to make this filing. And then going forward next year, any new entity will have 30 days to make this filing. Now, this is not a continuing obligation where every year you have to make a filing. You only need to make a filing when there are changes in the business. So if you add an owner who becomes a beneficial owner under the statute, you have to report them to the agency. Or if you get a new passport or driver's license, you have an obligation. So this is something that I have been informing all of my clients about. I've attached a link here for you to see the actual website where you make the filing. I can tell you it is not a very difficult thing to do. It's just something you have to do. So moving on, the next thing we think about when you're running a business is, do you need to apply for any permits or licenses? So it is important to be aware that there may be, depending on the nature of your business, you may need certain permits, you may need certain licenses, you may need certain compliance or registration. So, and this could be at the federal level, this could be at the state level, the city level, the municipal level, the local level. So you may need to get, if you're operating in the city of Chicago, you may need to get a business license and depending on what type of business you're doing, you may need to get certified or get a certain type of permit. If you're operating in a local suburb or municipality, you may need to get a license from them to operate a business. You always want to make sure you're checking wherever you're operating. It's always a good idea to go to that website of that municipality, that village, that city, and see what their requirements are for running a business. You definitely don't want to risk being unlicensed, where if caught, there could be fines or forced compliance, and really you don't want to deal with that headache. So I've given you here just two links. One of the city of Chicago's licensing page, and the other, Illinois' licensing page. So one thing that a lot of my clients at first don't appreciate until we actually get into it is, so you've set this entity up, you've filed for your tax ID, you've got your permits, and then you find out I tried to get a bank account and the bank's asking me for something called an operating agreement for my LLC, or they're asking me for my bylaws or my shareholders agreement for my corporation. What is that? Well, these are the governing documents of your business. These are very important because they set forth all of the principles of ownership, of control in the business. And especially if you are operating a business with more than one person. So if you have a partner of any sort, if you have investors, you need to have governing documents because these documents will basically spell out what rights do you have as a shareholder or a member in this company. So what things can you vote on? What type of vote is required to approve something or consent to something? What decisions does the board make day to day? How do we allocate profits and losses for tax purposes in an LLC? Um, you know, one of the most important things that we see in these documents is what happens to your equity if something happens to you. So you know there's estate planning and wills and trusts and things you can do personally, but what happens to your business equity if you, let's say you're running a business with a partner and your partner is married at the time you start the business, but then they file for divorce and the divorce court starts saying, well, the spouse of your partner gets half of the spouse's equity, but they're not actually contributing to the business, but now they get half of that. You want to have something called a buy-sell provision in these governing documents that really spells out what happens to your equity upon certain trigger events. These trigger events can be bankruptcy, or other types of insolvency. They could be divorce, it can be death, it can be disability, any sort of involuntary withdrawal, meaning you have a partner or a person leaving the business involuntarily. Or what happens if somebody wants to, voluntarily transfer their equity to a third party? If you're running a small business with a small group of people, you probably want to restrict their ability to get rid of their equity. I don't want my partner to say, hey, my neighbor really likes what we're doing here, so I'm going to sell half of my equity to them. You want to be able to stop that and say only upon certain levels of consent can you transfer this equity or do that sort of thing. Or what if you bring on investors or give employees options or some sort of incentive equity? What rights do they have? You really want to spell these things out in a governing document. And this is where a lot of my expertise comes into play because I draft these documents all the time. And what the goal is the goal is for you to operate your business and have this document so that if there's ever a dispute where one partner says to the other, I thought you were supposed to do X in exchange for Y, but you're not doing this, you can both look at this document and it should clear up any disputes without you having to expend time and resources, hiring independent lawyers to sue each other or, enforce something that is very clear. My goal is, as much as I have enjoyed being in court in the past, I certainly don't enjoy when my clients are in court, and I want to keep them out of court. So the next kind of facet here we're going to talk about is financing the business. So there are basically, four major ways we see businesses financed. And I mean, how do you get enough money to run the business, start it up? So you can owner fund. If you have startup capital yourself, you can inject that in the business. You may pursue a bank or a lender to get a loan. And that can sometimes be tricky to startups who have no operating history. And if you don't have other major assets to leverage, a bank may not be interested in loaning you a large amount of money. So you may turn to investors. You may say, I want to raise money by giving investors equity in my company or by raising it through a debt offering, which is sort of, it's something like a convertible note or something called a SAFE, where somebody they loan the business money and it operates like a normal loan, but it can convert into equity upon certain triggering events. These are very complex documents. You want to have a lawyer draft them. The other option is crowdfunding. And I do not mean, doing the crowdfunding where you go on any of those sites where you're like, if the first 100 people that chip in get a poster and a CD or whatever the case is. I'm talking about regulated crowdfunding. Now, of course, you can pursue the other piece where you do Kickstarters and things like that. But crowdfunding, there's a formal vehicle to raise funds from investors, and it's sort of a complex process. But these are basically the four major ways we see clients raising money. Now, another caution tip: when you are looking to get a traditional loan from a bank or a lender, they will likely require a personal guarantee on the loan or to collateralize the loan somehow. And what I mean is they're going to ask you to either, personally sign the loan to say, if my company can't make payments back to the bank, I will personally be responsible and you can come after me personally. Or you're going to collateralize and secure the loan with the assets of your house, your car, your business. These are things you want to be aware of. And these are reasonable calculations of risk that you want to think about. The other big ticket thing is if you're raising money from investors, I tell clients it's a complex minefield of securities laws that involve both federal and state laws, and you want to work with a lawyer that knows what they're doing, because you don't know what you don't know. And I promise you, you would be in a really bad position if you go to raise funds and don't do it in a securities compliant manner. And then also you want to, this is a big tip, is before you go out and raise money or bring in new partners or investors, you always want to review your governing documents so that they accommodate, because these are living, breathing documents. And what these governing documents should do is reflect your current situation of your business. So if you're bringing in a new partner who has a new role, new responsibilities, new agreements, how you guys are splitting everything up, you want to modify your agreement to suit those circumstances. Always do it before somebody comes in, because you don't need their vote before they come in to make the changes you want. A couple other things that we're wrapping up here before questions, but a couple things to think about when you're running your business. Insurance can do things that no amount of legal wrangling can do. So it is very important to explore getting proper insurance on your business. Depending on what type of business you have, there's all different types of insurance that are available, and it's best to speak with an insurance broker who can help you. And I don't mean a home and auto broker. I mean somebody who insures businesses, commercial lines of insurance. So there could be general liability policies. There could be products liability policies. There could be malpractice or personal, professional liability policies, errors and omissions policies. These are all things you want to explore. Key person insurance. So I mentioned before, what happens if a partner in the business dies or becomes disabled? You can buy them out with the insurance policy that you get. These are called it's basically a life insurance policy on the heads of the owners. In this way, if something happens to an owner of a business, that the business itself doesn't have to scrounge up the funds to buy out that partner's equity. They can use the proceeds from an insurance policy. Cyber insurance is becoming bigger and bigger these days as we keep seeing more sophisticated, phishing expeditions and hackers, all sorts of malfeasance. It is really important to explore if you need to get cyber insurance. And then lastly, if you are employing people, first off, you may be required by the state to have insurance to, workers' comp insurance for your employees. And you may have certain lines of insurance to protect you from employer liability so that your insurance policy can make payments out if you are found liable for something. Another, sort of the last thing we will talk about is, so you've got your business up and running, you've got your structure set up, you've got your partners or your hierarchical structure set up, you've got your employees. Now you need to focus on proper commercial agreements. So you want to work with an attorney to draft certain types of contracts, depending on what type of business you have. So if you're in, if you're in a business that has employees or contractors, you want employment agreements that are properly drafted to protect the company. You want independent contractor agreements that do the same thing. You may lease property, for your storefront or your manufacturing output. You want to have a proper commercial lease. You may be an online business that has terms of use and service and a privacy policy. You may be a supplier or a distribution, company or a logistics company. You may be licensing certain material to somebody. So you may create content that you license to others. All of these different types of businesses, regardless of what they are, rely on some set of agreements. And I promise you, it is well worth the time and investment to have a proper set of documents and contracts, because my personal philosophy is contracts do not need to contain Latin words everywhere in 17th century English to be effective. They need to be clear and concise, and they need to say, the party A understands their role and responsibility to be this, and party B understands their role and responsibility to be that. And there's what we call in the law a meeting of the minds, no confusion. That way, if there is a dispute, you can turn to the contract and resolve it without spending more money down the road. So with that, I am happy to talk offline with anybody. I've put here a QR code you can scan with your phone to find my website. I am happy now to answer any questions you may have for the remainder of our time.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Matt. We do have a few questions lined up. If anyone has any more, please feel free to add them into the Q&A section. The first question is from someone who is interested in owning a cafe, however, is finding funding difficult because they have less than stellar credit. Do you have any advice for this situation?
So some of that's, it's a difficult problem, but it's not, again, there are different ways to raise funds, and it's not necessarily needing to go the traditional route. If you are having a tough time with traditional lending, it can behoove you to explore partnering up with folks. So I've had clients in the past that say, look, I can't make the financial commitment myself to start this business, but I may be able to attract a partner who's going to invest some capital, and I'm going to have to give up some of the equity in the company, but together we can make this a reality. And so by relying on private funding, which is outside of, the traditional risk adverse loan, banks and traditional financing, private investors or partners who may say, look, I'm willing to pony up some of the startup costs here, but I want to get a certain percentage of the company. That may be a better option for you, at least at this point, until you can build up enough business credit to be able to start pursuing lines of credit or traditional financing.
Great, thank you very much. A second question is from someone who is interested in starting a home organization business as a sole proprietorship. Do you have any advice on sole proprietorship service businesses in Chicago?
Yeah, so a sole proprietorship, we didn't cover the topic here, but for everyone else, a sole proprietorship is essentially you're doing business as you don't have an entity in front of you, so you don't have an actual business entity. You're just operating yourself. You may get we call them assumed names in Illinois, a DBA, or a doing business as name. So you might be referred to, whatever the business name is, but you don't have an actual LLC or corporation or other entity shielding you from liability. also from the tax front, it's as if you're just making money yourself. So you're just filing your personal income taxes, showing these, this income. So in terms of, you know, I would look at this in two ways. I'd look at this from the tax side of things. Is there a benefit to forming an entity because there might be more beneficial tax treatment? You may be able to write things off differently. You may be able to take certain deductions that you can't take as an individual sole proprietor. But then on the other side, while I will acknowledge there's likely very little risk in running a home organization program, it's a lot different than if you were going into catering where you're like spilling hot liquids and things like that. I don't think there's as much risk in terms of running a home organization business as there is in some other lines, but it's still one of those things where what if you get a dissatisfied customer and they want their money back, or they say you broke something while you were there and now they're going to sue you? There's nothing in front of you protecting you like a business entity would be. So that's something to think about.
Great. And does it change anything if you were starting this sole proprietorship service business as a disabled person under Social Security?
I'm not sure I understand the
So,
question.
does it have an impact, for example, on your Social Security or your disability
I see.
benefits, for example?
That I do not know.
All right. Let's see. Next question is from someone who is looking into starting a business that can specifically employ neurodivergent folks. And do you have any advice on where to gain knowledge and additional information employing this special population of people?
I will say number one, good for you. My oldest son is living with autism, and I think it's a fantastic thing to open, the options for folks. And if you wanted to reach out to me privately, I'm sure I can connect you with some folks. So if you just go to my website through the QR code here, if you go to my personal bio, my email and contact information is right there.
The website I did also put in the chat too, in case anyone wants to
Wonderful.
copy it from there as well. Question from another person. I'm interested in e-business. There are two products that could be sold online. The website is in need of a store to make this happen. I'm looking for a business loan in order to pursue this venture. Can you discuss how business and social policy differ? I'm finding that in business, for instance, competition makes a better product. Conversely, social policy requires a more cooperative behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I do not disagree with that contention. I think so. I personally think that there's a difference between competition and oversaturation, number one. And I do see, especially right now, what we're seeing like with, well, who knows what's going to happen with TikTok, but you see honestly the blow up in online retailers because of TikTok, where we are seeing unique ways. Instead of the products being unique, it's more so the way that the products are being sold, or the personality, or the channel behind the product that's being, the most appealing, because we're seeing such a saturated market. There's only so many fidgets that you can make. It's really how is it marketed or appealing to the public. Hopefully that answered your question partially. If you want to clarify it, you can ask it again a different way too.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Do you have any tips for online business, a digital marketing agency, for example, that is planning to provide services all over the United States? Particularly, the person wants to know what the taxing structure would be like for that type of business.
So if you mean, so one thing we didn't touch here, because we were assuming this is an Illinois business, if you are registered to do business in Illinois and you have a big client base in Indiana, under the law, you're supposed to file as a foreign entity in Indiana where basically Indiana recognizes that you're an Illinois business entity, but you're permitted to do business in Indiana. Now, this is not, there's no like black and white law or rule that says here is the exact criteria in which you would have to file in those states. It's actually kind of gray. There's a lot of case law that tells us what doesn't constitute doing business, but there isn't enough case law that talks about what is doing business. And what I'm getting at here is if you're doing a substantial amount of business in a specific state, usually I advise my clients to register in that state. And if you're registered in that state, you might need to pay state taxes in that state. And so when you're an online service provider, typically just because you have clients located all over the place doesn't necessarily mean that you need to file in 50 states as an entity and pay 50 annual report fees and file taxes in 50 states. Really, if you're operating out of Illinois and you have a handful of clients in different states, I don't know that rises to the level of, hey, I have to report that I'm doing business in this state. Now, if you open up an office location there or you employ personnel in those different states, you usually want to file, and that might implicate whether or not you have to pay state taxes. But your federal tax return is your federal return. Doesn't matter where you're operating out of. But your tax professional or CPA could better discuss this with you. And if you're selling products in different states, usually you want to talk to an accountant too about whether or not you need to pay sales taxes in different states.
Great, thank you so much. Another attendee wanting to know, how do we file or find the form about listing who the owners are for the state or for the government?
So in this, let me go back here so you can see it. I put it in here. So there's a link right here. It's this HTTPS, / BOIE filing.fincen.gov. That site will lead you to not only where you need to file, but it will provide a FAQ as well to sort of answer a lot of simple questions about the process. And I promise you, I've been telling clients, you can absolutely pay me to do this, but this is not something you need a lawyer to do. This is something you can do yourself. It's clerical, administrative work.
Great. All right, well, thank you very much. We are just exactly at 7 p.m. and it looks like we have answered all the open questions. So thank you very much for your time this year again. It's delightful to see you and have you talk about this topic with us, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And then as Matt mentioned, obviously you've got the QR code there or the formulairlaw.com link in the chat, and you can look him up and he will share the slideshow with me that I will send out to everyone who registered for this event as well. So you'll have all of these details at your fingertips, hopefully within the next couple of days. So thank you again, Matt. Thank you again to everyone for attending, and we hope to see you next month.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great night, everyone.